question here, and I'm a geologist, so don't get mad at me if you're a geologist. Should you let your field geologists pick the samples that will feed into the multi-million-dollar studies, plant designs, and mine construction? And I said, no, you should not. I'll give you some.
Because they're only going to pick the shiny parts.
All right, well, that's it for that talk. Nathan stole my punch.
I'm a metallurgist.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the answer. So what we want to avoid, and actually I wrote this talk before I even knew I was going to be an Osisko employee, but this is Osisko 1. So Osisko actually was built around what is now the largest gold mine in Canada. And they had to put out a press release in 2011, soon after they built the plant and they were ramping up. And they said, we have to put another $32 million because they're having ore grinding issues. And basically, there was going to be delay. They were not going to get as much gold as they thought. And the whole market's like, show us the gold. Like, please, what's the delay? So they took a big hit on the stock price at that time. And essentially, and now I know the real story, and it's close to that, but essentially they didn't understand how hard the rock was when they designed the plant. And part of that was they just didn't take enough samples or the right kinds of samples. And so when I worked with SGS Geostat, we actually had a huge metallurgical, maybe it's this cord here, huge metallurgical plant, our testing facilities. And we would encourage people to say, let my group select the samples for you. We know about variability and ore grade and all this stuff. And usually they come back and say, no, I got this guy Johnny, and Johnny is a geologist. He's going to do this for us. I'm like, okay. There's a few problems with Johnny. Johnny's a human. I don't want me to be racist, but like humans are the worst. So humans like to pick shiny objects. It's in our nature. The geologist, who's an exploration guy, he wants good results. He's always been told drill the high-grade parts or whatever. So when the metallurgist says, go get me a sample, he automatically assumes he wants the good samples. Humans are lazy, so the pallet of core, which is near the door, is probably where the sample is going to come from. And Johnny doesn't have the full view of what the mine's going to look like. He doesn't know what the schedule is. He doesn't know what the different ore domains are going to be. He doesn't know what the cutoff grade is. So he doesn't have the full picture of what's required in the mine. And so I set out to make different stages of mining. And since I made the talk, I was able to put in my own stage there, right there in the middle, the sample selection. And basically the Venn diagram here is showing you that a lot of these different things are interdisciplinary, but primarily in stage number 5, which is the sample selection, and stage number 8, which is the final feasibility, they need to have some communication between the different groups that are doing the study to get something that's really representative. This is a very busy slide on purpose. Basically, it shows that it's a complex process. What we're actually trying to do is quite simple. We're trying to represent the sample that's going to be what goes from the truck into the mill. So go from the block model, break the rock, and go here. But we want this to be representative. So that's the overreaching goal. I mean, you get really fancy with lots of math and stuff, but often people get lost in the details, and we just sort of have some simple lessons or rules that we want to do. So the overall goal is representativity. So represent the different ore types that we're going to see inside the mill. There's a few rules. So rule number 1, be within the mine plan. So we've actually had cases where all of the samples were outside of the pit, which none of it was ore, because ore needs to be confined into a mine sequence. So that one seems really obvious. The other thing too is the banks like to see your first 5 years de-risked. So the lenders are going to maybe ask you, can you show me that you're going to recover things, but in the ore that's in the first 5 years? So you can have a slightly heavier weighting for that part. Rule number 2 is have samples within a range of grade that is possible on a scale of a week or more. So the reason is that this pink part, so pink is really, really high grade, but this volume of rock will never be alone inside the mill. And so the idea of a scale of a week means that, you know, it's a blending that's appropriate, that the guy controlling the levers inside the mill can make a decision on that scale of rock and time. So why do we consider time? So it's all about when we make averages, we tend to reduce the variance, right? So if we take just the block model, so each block may have, let's say, 10 tons, and we draw the histogram of the grade distribution of that, we will have a much longer tail. But if we start lumping together blocks, so in this case here, we lump together blocks on the production scale of 1 week or on stopes, so we just sort of make averages. Then if we say, well, I only have a budget for 3 samples, what should the grade be? Well, the Q50, Q90, Q10 is going to be much different in this case versus this case. The mill will never see 6 grams per ton on a time period which is worthwhile. Incorporate realistic dilution. So when we mine, we don't mine perfectly. We tend to take waste in with our ore. And the mine plan will tell us about how much waste we incorporate in the ore. And why that's important is that, so given the different mine plan that we have, there would be a different type of dilution. So the actual grade of the mineralization will be different, the amount of dilution. So that will teach us what the recipe is for that sample we're going to send to the Met Lab should look like. And so this is the most common thing we would get. So in my office, we would take the data and figure out what's the recipe for the sample. And then Johnny, the geologist, would come back and be like, dude, you're sending this waste. Like, why are you doing this to me? Like, this waste is going to see in the mill, and actually all of this chunk is going to see the inside of the mill, and you need to capture that information in what we want to do. So this is an example of a lithium pegmatite. So lithium is hot. If you don't know it, people are looking for more lithium and more cobalt. So I'm sure around those of you that walk the floor, it's like the graphite's out of style, and we're going lithium and cobalt. So this is the contact between ore and waste. So the ore is actually a pegmatite with spodumene. So spodumene is a lithium silicate. And the waste rock here is a granodiorite of some sort. The problem with this project is that the samples were taken in such a way that they took the very, very cleanest sample that they could. So any opportunity to have granodiorite, like even in the core, they would lop off the piece of core and send the very whitest thing they could. So the met tests were all positive. The problem is that the green mineral in here, which is amphibolite, amphibole, floats just as well as the spodumene. So any amount of this material in the circuit actually created after they've crushed it and they sent it into the flotation cells, the grade of the material went actually down because they were diluting it with this here, which is a terrible catastrophe for this company. So capturing the lesson is, if they had captured this, they would have learned a lesson early on and then adjusted the plant to take care of that situation. We want to make sure that we understand so now I've talked about the 3 rules, the 3 steps now. So we want to understand what the different domains of mineralization are. So that's an exercise much like we would do for the resource estimation. We'll look at different mineralogy, grade, alteration, texture, and lump them together in the way that's logical. In some cases, we understand very well what the controls on mineralization is. So in a VMS deposit, we know very well what it looks like. And we have an expectation of what the distribution of mineralization is. So we have copper gold rich part of the deposit and then a zinc lead rich part of the deposit. So we should go out and look for that type of distribution. So this is a VMS deposit in Turkey. And if on the x-axis here is actually the lead zinc richness of the deposit. So these are very copper rich ores and these are very zinc rich ores. And it would be easy if I had like a bimodal distribution and I could draw a line right in the middle of them. But in this case, I sort of selected 3 different bins. So I said, this is yellow ore, transition to black. And then I took the data and actually looked at it to see, well, is it possible that the mill will see one of these 3? Is it even splittable? Because if in a 2-meter piece of core you get all 3, then it's impossible that in the mining sequence you can select it separately. So you can see the black dots are black ore, yellow ore and blue ore, so I validated that these are actually separate ore types that might see the mill separately. How many domains are needed? So you can blow your brains trying to split things by all the different factors, the different alteration types, and all that. But usually it comes down to budget anyway, so you have to lump things together in a logical way. So the sample selection, we need to look at, what weight is required. Sample availability, oftentimes people assume that the samples are available and they're not really anywhere at hand. And at the end of the day, again, you're sort of forced to select a number of samples which the budget is telling you what you need to do. So there's different scales of sample. You can do variability samples. So these are usually much smaller, and you do a higher number of them to try to capture what the variability is. Composite samples. So now you can start taking pieces of core from different parts of the deposit and lumping them together. And at the end, you want to take a bulk sample for certain different ore types that are more risky, like lithium and other things that you need to figure out the mineralogy really well. In gold deposits, it's fairly rare that we see a pilot plant unless it's something that needs a special treatment. And then you want to look to make sure that the sample is actually representative of the ore, so you can see in space, does the sample cover the deposit, and then in the grade or different factors here to just make sure that it fits your expectation.
It's not you.
So this is the Turkish example here again. So I sorted the samples. There was 30 samples. I sorted them by its copper richness or lead richness. So from increasing copper rich to zinc lead rich. And then what I wanted to see in these other factors. So these were the other factors that we consider to be important in terms of the variability and how the mineralization will impact the recovery. So the NSR is actually the value, so the grade of the deposit. The silica and clay alteration. So what I wanted to see when I made this graph is that I had lots of variability, so I was capturing all the different factors in this case. And then if I sorted by NSR, so least valuable to most valuable ore, then again, I wanted to see some variability in here. So I was satisfied that I was covering all the different scenarios that were possible for this deposit. And then this was the most common question we had, is how many samples do I need? How much is enough? And this is the only guy that I want his opinion. He just left the room. Jeez. So for a preliminary economic assessment, so this is the first sort of step where you're trying to estimate the value of your ore. You basically just want to have enough samples to give yourself some comfort. So usually 1 to 5 total, and if it's a complex deposit like a VMS where you have different ore types, then maybe 1 to 5 per domain. A pre-feasibility study, and we're seeing a trend towards people skipping. I know Osisko was guilty of that. We skip the pre-feasibility, we do a PA, and then we're like, this is awesome, we're going to go here. But this is a step where you need to see all the different risks that are ahead of you. So you want to do a lot of sampling here, a lot of variability samples. And this is where you're going to see, oh, geez, I have one ore type, which the gold is stuck in the pyrite, and there's no way to get it out. So when you go to plan your super expensive tests here, you already know that you have a domain that you need to take care of. Either you don't plan to mine it, or you plan a different plan. So for Osisko, in my defense, is we usually do a lot of sampling in this stage here. So the tests are very expensive, so people try to cut corners, but I mean, design flaws and getting your plant wrong is even more costly. Identifying problem ores early will reduce your budget because you'll be able to plan around them. And then do your mineralogy homework. So this is a very typical situation where you're in a pilot plant, $1 million campaign, and then something's not going right, and they're like, what's going on? And they have to go do their homework, do the mineralogy, and find out there's gold and pyrite, and they can't get it out. So do this step first, and it'll save you a lot of money. So that's it. Any questions with respect to met sample selection? Yes.
At the beginning, you mentioned this problem of having Johnny geologists do this.
Yeah.
So the solution to that, you're suggesting I guess maybe you need to step the first.
Sure.
Off.
Is your name Johnny or?
Well, no, absolutely not. I'm joking, but,
yeah.
Are you suggesting a machine algorithm?
No.
Or that your company does?
So no. Well, at the time that's what I was selling, but the real answer is you need to get people around the room who understand what the deposit is going to be. So you need to have a metallurgist there, a mining engineer there and a geologist who understands the mine sequence, because all of those people individually have a part of the picture, and none of them can really say what the ore is going to look like through time. But by having them sit together and make a plan, then you're going to have a situation. And the exploration geologist in particular doesn't have the picture of the grade distribution, right? He knows that the from to interval from drill hole, but he doesn't know what the block model is and what the cutoff rate is. So it's getting more people to talk together. Yes.
So are you referring to the sort of the systematic loss of knowledge across every stage of the mine development process? And so how do you get people to actually come and talk together?
That's the big challenge. I think part of it is communicating that there's these things. There's a problem in the industry too, is when a project fails, people don't talk about it. Like that lithium project, there hasn't been an investigation and a publication like, oh, this is what happened, next time let's do this, because everybody's embarrassed. Everybody has egg on their face, the investors are embarrassed, everybody's embarrassed, so they don't talk about it. So that the solution is me talking to you people and talking about how to do things properly. So, yeah. And it's not so much a loss of, it is in a way a loss of information, but it's just a lack of communication. And thinking that this simple task is so easy that you can just ask anybody to go get samples, and it's not that easy. Yeah.
For old sample buys, people like say the exploration geologist has bonuses tied to say finding more grade. Then in that case, they're going to knock off that piece of wood stock, right?
I mean, that's a problem throughout the industry. I don't think that this is the easiest place to cheat. There's lots of other great places you can cheat and make your company look better. I think usually this is a lack of understanding of the importance of that system. And usually people assume that the metallurgy is easy, the rock is soft, and so it's just an exercise in discovering that it's harder than you think. So usually the person who you think might be cheating, he thinks the result is going to be good anyway, so he doesn't have that sort of. Now